At 6:42 on the morning of June 4, 1942, Ensign Robert Fletcher gripped the stick of his Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber with hands that would not stop shaking. He was 23 years old. He had logged exactly 17 operational flight hours since graduating from training 3 months earlier. Below him, somewhere beneath the broken cloud deck over the Central Pacific, sailed the most powerful carrier strike force the Imperial Japanese Navy had ever assembled. His squadron commander had just given the order that everyone knew was coming but nobody wanted to hear. Prepare for immediate attack. No fighter escort. No second wave as backup. Just 16 Dauntless bombers against 4 Japanese carriers, their screening destroyers, and what intelligence estimated as 60 to 80 fighters flying combat air patrol. In the ready room 40 minutes earlier, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey had looked at the faces of his pilots and said something that would stay with Fletcher for the rest of his life. He said that the enemy did not believe American dive bomber pilots had the skill or the courage to press and attack all the way through to the deck. Japanese doctrine assumed that most U.S. Navy pilots would release their 1,000-pound bombs early, flinching at 5,000 feet or higher, where accuracy became a matter of luck rather than precision. The Japanese were wrong about American courage, McCluskey said, but they were absolutely right about American inexperience. Half the pilots in that ready room, Fletcher included, had never dropped a bomb in actual combat. The enemy knew this. They were counting on it. Fletcher came from a town in rural Kansas where the biggest excitement before Pearl Harbor had been Friday night football games and the annual county fair. His father ran a garage on Main Street, a to-bay operation that serviced tractors, trucks, and the occasional automobile. His mother taught 3rd grade at the elementary school where Fletcher himself had learned to read. He had 2 younger sisters, Emma and Grace, who wrote him letters every week, filling page after page with news about harvest, dances, and church socials and who was dating whom, as if the whole world had not caught fire. Before the war, Fletcher had planned to take over his father's garage, maybe expand it to 4 bays, marry his high school sweetheart Linda, and never travel farther than Topeka. Pearl Harbor had rewritten all of that. He enlisted the day after the attack, driven by a fury he did not fully understand and could not fully express. His father had driven him to the recruiting station in Wichita without saying much, then shaken his hand at the door and made him promise one thing. Come home. Whatever happens out there, you come home. The promise felt impossibly heavy now, 20,000 feet above the Pacific, with his fuel gauge already nudging toward the red and his wingman's aircraft trailing smoke from an oil leak that should have grounded him before takeoff. Fletcher had exactly 9 practice dives logged in training. 9. He had dropped practice bombs on targets painted on the California desert near San Diego, and he had missed more than he hit. His instructors had been honest with him. They told him he was an adequate pilot with decent reflexes but nothing extraordinary. They told him he would need to get lucky to survive his first real engagement. They did not tell him that his first real engagement would be the most important naval battle of the war, but he was starting to figure that out on his own. The Dauntless was not a glamorous aircraft. Pilots called it the slow but deadly, a nickname that captured both its limitations and its lethal potential. It was slow, heavy when loaded with a bomb, and cursed with a cruising speed that made it easy prey for the nimble Japanese Zero fighters. Its top speed barely exceeded 250 knots in level flight. A Zero could outrun it, outearn it, and outclimb it in almost every circumstance. But the Dauntless had 2 things going for it. First, it was tough. The airframe was built like a tank, with redundant systems and armor plating around the cockpit. A Dauntless could absorb punishment that would shred lighter aircraft and still bring its crew home. Fletcher had heard stories of Dauntlesses returning to their carriers with over 100 bullet holes, 1 engine dead, half the tail shot away, and still making arrested landings. Second, it had dive brakes, perforated flaps that extended from the wings and allowed the pilot to dive nearly vertically without accelerating into a terminal plunge. This meant a Dauntless pilot could point his nose straight down at a target, hold that screaming dive through 5,000 feet of anti-aircraft fire, and release his bomb low enough that even a mediocre bombardier had a decent chance of hitting something important. The cost was that the pilot became a stationary target for every gun on every ship below. Doctrine called for releasing it to 1,000 feet. Aggressive pilots pushed it to 1,500. The truly reckless or the truly desperate went lower. Fletcher had heard stories about what happened to pilots who pushed their dives too far. At some point below 1,000 feet, human reaction time could not compensate for the speed of the dive and the proximity of the target. Pull out too early and you waste the bomb, sending it into the ocean or skipping it harmlessly across the deck. Pull out too late and you auger straight into the ocean or into the deck of the ship you are trying to destroy, taking yourself and your gunner with you. The mechanics back on the carrier had a nickname for dives that went below 1,000 feet. They called them suicide dives. Not because every pilot died, though many did, but because the odds shifted so heavily against survival that attempting one was effectively writing your own death certificate. Fletcher had never attempted a suicide dive. He had never needed to, but he had a feeling, deep in his gut where fear and intuition mixed into something he could not name, that today he would need to. The squadron climbed through patchy clouds, following McCluskey's lead. Radio chatter was minimal. Everyone knew the Japanese were listening, triangulating, vectoring fighters to intercept. Silence bought time, but not much. Fletcher scanned the sky constantly, looking for the sun glint off a Zero's canopy or the dark cruciform shape of an enemy fighter against the clouds. His backseat gunner, aviation radioman second class Mike Kozlowski, was doing the same from the rear cockpit. Kozlowski was 31, a decade older than Fletcher, a veteran of the Atlantic convoy runs before the Navy transferred him to the Pacific. He had survived to ships sunk under him by U-boats and had a reputation for being unflappable under fire. Fletcher found that reputation comforting. If Kozlowski was scared, he never showed it. He just checked his twin Browning machine guns, muttered something that might have been a prayer or might have been a curse in Polish, and kept his eyes moving across the sky. They had been airborne for an hour and 30 minutes when McCluskey's voice crackled over the radio. Target in sight. 11 o'clock low. Fletcher looked where his commander indicated and felt his stomach lurch. Through a gap in the clouds, he could see them. For carriers, arranged in a loose box formation, their decks crowded with aircraft. He could not make out details from this altitude, but intelligence had briefed them thoroughly. Those carriers were the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu and Hiryu, the pride of the Japanese fleet, the same carriers that had struck Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier, that had rampaged through the Dutch East Indies, that had forced the Royal Navy out of the Indian Ocean and Ceylon. Individually, each one carried more striking power than most small nations could muster. Together, they represented a sword aimed directly at the heart of American naval power in the Pacific. If the United States lost its carriers at Midway, Japan would control the ocean from Hawaii to Australia. The war would effectively be over, with America forced into a defensive posture that could last years or decades. Fletcher knew all of this in an abstract, intellectual way. The briefing officers had explained it with maps and charts and confident voices. But what hit him viscerally, in the moment he saw those ships through the clouds, was simpler and more immediate. He was about to dive into a cloud of steel and fire with 1,000-pound bombs strapped under his belly, and the people shooting at him were very good at their jobs. The Japanese had been fighting in China for 5 years before Pearl Harbor. Their anti-aircraft gunners were not farm boys fresh out of boot camp. They were seasoned professionals who had shot down Chinese, British, Dutch and American aircraft by the dozen. They knew how to lead a diving target. They knew how to coordinate fire from multiple ships. They knew exactly how to kill him. McCluskey's voice came again, calm and deliberate. We go in from the south. I will take the nearest carrier. 2nd Division takes the second carrier. 3rd Division holds in reserve. Execute on my mark. Standard doctrine. Standard tactics. Nothing fancy. Just point the nose down, hold the dive through the fire, release the bomb at the optimal altitude, and pull up before the ocean or the target deck rushes up to meet you. Fletcher was in 2nd Division, flying wing for Lieutenant Richard Best, one of the few pilots in the squadron with actual combat experience. His target was the second carrier in line, identified in the briefing as Kaga. She was huge, displacing over 42,000 tons fully loaded, with a flight deck longer than 3 football fields laid end to end. She carried 70 aircraft and a crew of over 2,000 men. She was also, according to the intelligence summary, equipped with 96 anti-aircraft guns of various calibers, from small 25mm automatic cannons to larger 5-inch batteries. 96 guns, all of which would be pointed at him the moment he started his dive. The squadron began to split into divisions, wheeling into attack positions with the precision of a parade formation. Fletcher throttled back slightly to maintain proper spacing behind Best's aircraft. His engine was running rough, a vibration he could feel through the stick and rudder pedals. Probably a fouled spark plug, maybe a clogged fuel line. Probably nothing that would kill him before the Japanese did. He checked his instruments one last time. Airspeed good at 140 knots. Altitude 19,000 feet. Fuel at half plus a quarter. Enough to get back to the carrier if he did not waste time sightseeing or fighting Zeros. Bomb arming switch in the safe position. Red light glowing on the instrument panel. He would flip that switch to arm 10 seconds before starting the dive, standard procedure to prevent the bomb from detonating if he took a hit before committing to the attack. Dive brakes retracted and locked. He would deploy those the instant he rolled into the attack, using them to control his dive speed and angle. Everything was as ready as it was ever going to be. Kozlowski's voice came through the intercom, calm and flat despite the content. Zeros climbing from 2 o'clock. I count 6, make that 8. More coming up from the deck. Fletcher looked and saw them, small and fast, climbing hard to intercept. The Zeros were beautiful aircraft in a deadly way, light and agile, capable of outrunning and outclimbing almost anything the Allies could put in the air. A Zero pilot with altitude and speed advantage could shred a dauntless formation before the bombers even reached their push-over point, picking them off one by one like a hawk among pigeons. But the Zeros had a problem. They were climbing from low altitude, burning fuel and energy to reach the bombers. If McCluskey timed the attack right, the Zeros would still be 1,000 feet below when the Dauntlesses started their dives. And once a Dauntless was committed to a dive, a Zero could not follow. The speeds were too high, the angles too steep. The Zero's lightweight construction, which made it so agile in a dogfight, also made it fragile. A Zero attempting to match a Dauntless dive would tear itself apart, wings ripping off, control surfaces failing, the pilot pulling G-forces that would black him out or kill him. It was a race. Whoever got into position first would dictate the terms of the engagement. Fletcher watched the Zeros climb, watched McCluskey's Dauntless waggle its wings in the signal to attack, and heard the squadron commander's voice one last time. All units, this is McCluskey. We are going in now. Good hunting and good luck. Then McCluskey rolled inverted, pulled through into a vertical dive, and disappeared toward the ocean below. One by one, the other Dauntlesses followed, each pilot peeling off at 5-second intervals to maintain spacing and give the ships below multiple targets to track. Fletcher counted 6, 7, 8 aircraft rolling into their dives ahead of him. Then it was his turn. He took one breath, deep and shaky, filling his lungs with the smell of oil and metal and fear. He thought about his father's garage, the way it smelled like grease and coffee and the leather of old truck seats. He thought about Linda's last letter, which he had read so many times that the paper was starting to tear along the folds. She had written about the garden she was planting, about the tomatoes and beans, and how she hoped the war would be over before harvest, so he could help her kin them. She had ended the letter the way she always did. Come home safe. I am waiting for you. He thought about the promise he had made to his father, the promise to come home. Then he shoved the throttle forward, rolled his Dauntless inverted, and pulled the stick back into his lap. The world flipped. Sky became ocean. Clouds became ships. The horizon disappeared. The Dauntless's nose dropped through level flight and kept dropping, steeper and steeper, until Fletcher was staring straight down the throat of hell. He flipped the dive brake switch. The perforated panels extended from his wings with a shudder and a scream of displaced air. His airspeed stabilized at 280 knots, fast but controllable, the dive brakes doing their job of preventing a terminal velocity plunge. The altimeter spun backward like a clock running in reverse. 18,000 feet, 17,000, 16,000. The numbers blurred together, time compressing into a narrow tunnel of sensation and reaction. The first anti-aircraft bursts appeared below him, black puffs of smoke blossoming in clusters of 3 and 4. The Japanese gunners were firing blind at this altitude, putting up a curtain of steel and hoping the Americans would fly into it. Fletcher ignored the bursts. He was too high for them to matter, too high for the shrapnel to reach him with lethal force. What mattered was the target. He could see Kata clearly now, her flight deck a long 10 rectangle, her island superstructure a blocky gray tower on the starboard side. Aircraft were parked wingtip to wingtip on the deck. being fueled and armed for a strike against the American carriers. Fletcher could see crew members running, tiny figures in dark uniforms, scrambling to respond to the attack they had not expected. The intelligence briefing had said the Japanese believed their own fighters would intercept the American bombers long before they reached the carriers. The intelligence briefing had been correct. The Japanese were not ready. 15,000 feet, 14,000. The anti-aircraft fire was intensifying, the black bursts creeping closer as the gunners refined their aim. Fletcher could hear shrapnel pinging off his wings and fuselage, small impacts that sounded like gravel thrown against a tin roof. None of it mattered yet. He kept the nose pointed at Kaga's midship section, where the briefing photos had indicated the forward elevators were located. A bomb through the elevator would drop straight into the hangar deck below, where fueled and armed aircraft sat ready to ignite like a string of firecrackers. One bomb, in the right place, could turn Kaga into a floating funeral pyre. 12,000 feet, 11,000. The carrier was enormous now, filling his windscreen, no longer an abstract target but a physical reality of steel and wood and human beings. He could see individual gun mounts, individual aircraft with their wings folded, individual crew members frozen in place as they looked up at him. He could see tracers arcing up toward him, lazy and slow from this altitude but deadly fast in reality, red and orange streaks that looked like fireflies in the dusk. Some of the tracers were passing close enough that he could feel the heat, could see the individual bullets spinning as they flashed past his canopy. Kozlowski was firing back, short controlled bursts from the twin Brownings in the rear cockpit. Fletcher did not know if Kozlowski was hitting anything, but the sound was comforting, a reminder that he was not alone in this screaming plunge. 10,000 feet, 9,000. Fletcher's training took over, muscle memory and drilled procedure pushing aside the fear and the chaos. He stopped thinking about Linda or his father or his promise. He stopped being a person. He became a machine, a guidance system for the 1,000-pound bomb under his belly. His world narrowed to three things: the target, the altimeter, the airspeed. Everything else was noise, the shrapnel clanging off his aircraft like a blacksmith's hammer. The tracers flashing past his canopy close enough to touch. Kozlowski's voice yelling something urgent and unintelligible over the intercom. None of it registered. He was in the zone, the place where time stretched and slowed and every second became an eternity and every eternity lasted only a heartbeat. 8,000 feet, 7,000. The anti-aircraft fire was a solid wall now. Not individual bursts but a continuous roiling cloud of smoke and steel fragments. Fletcher flew through it, felt his dauntless shudder and buck as shrapnel tore through aluminum skin and canvas control surfaces. Red lights flashed on his instrument panel. Something was leaking, probably hydraulic fluid. Something else was on fire, probably electrical. It did not matter. He was committed. There was no pulling out, no aborting, no second chance. Either he released the bomb and pulled up in time, or he did not. The decision had already been made the moment he rolled into the dive. 6,000 feet, 5,000. This was the altitude where doctrine said to release. This was where training said to let the bomb go. Trust the mathematics and the ballistics tables, pull up and run for home before the gunners tracked you perfectly. But Fletcher could see the problem. Kaga was maneuvering. Not much, just a slight turn to port, a defensive twist to throw off his aim. The carrier's captain was no fool. He knew that a stationary target was a dead target. If Fletcher released at 5,000 feet, the bomb would miss. It would hit the ocean 50 yards to starboard and do nothing but make a big splash and kill some fish. He would have wasted the dive, wasted the mission, wasted the chance to hurt the enemy. He kept the nose down. 4,000 feet, 3,000. Kozlowski was screaming now, a high panicked wail that cut through the roar of the engine and the scream of the dive brakes and the thunder of anti-aircraft guns. Pull up now. You are too low. We are going to die. Pull up. Fletcher ignored him. He could see deck planks now, could see the grain of the wood and the rivets holding the plates together. He could see pilots running for their aircraft, trying to get airborne, trying to defend their ship. He could see a damage control team frozen in place, staring up at him with faces too small to read but postures that spoke of pure terror. 2,500 feet, 2,000. The carrier deck filled his entire windscreen. There was nothing else in the universe. Just the deck, and the bomb, and the split-second decision that would determine whether he lived or died. 1,500 feet, 1,000. Fletcher's hand moved to the bomb release toggle, a simple mechanical switch on the left side of his control stick. This was it. This was the moment, but something stopped him. Some instinct, some voice in the back of his mind that was louder than the fear and the training and the screaming altimeter. The voice said that 1,000 feet was not low enough. The voice said that Kaga's gunners were tracking him perfectly now, that they had his speed and trajectory calculated, that if he released now and pulled up on the standard profile they would cut him to pieces before he gained 100 feet of altitude. The voice said that the only way to survive was to do something no one expected, something insane, something that would make the gunners flinch, make them hesitate for just a fraction of a second, long enough for him to pull up and escape. He pushed the nose down steeper, 800 feet. 700, 600. The Dauntless was shaking violently now, the airframe screaming in protest, metal groaning under stresses it was never designed to handle. The dive brakes were smoking, the perforated panels glowing cherry red from friction. His instruments were redlining across the board. Airspeed indicator buried in the red zone, altimeter and winding so fast the numbers were a blur. G-force meter pegged at the maximum. Kozlowski had stopped screaming. Either he had passed out from the G-forces or he had given up and was praying. Fletcher did not care. He was inside his own head now, in a place where time had stopped and the only thing that existed was the target and the release and the pull-up that had to come at exactly the right microsecond or they would both die. 500 feet, 400, 300. The carrier deck was so close now that Fletcher could read the identification numbers painted on the aircraft parked there. He could see the faces of the crew members, eyes wide, mouths open. He could see the muzzle flashes from the anti-aircraft guns, so close they looked like camera strobes. He could feel the heat from the tracers. He could smell cordite and burning metal. 250 feet, 200, 175. He hit the release. The Dauntless lurched upward as the 1,000-pound bomb dropped away, the sudden loss of weight making the aircraft jump like a spooked horse. Fletcher pulled back on the stick with every ounce of strength he had, both hands gripping the control column, both arms straining, shoulder muscles burning. G-forces crushed him down into his seat with the weight of an elephant. His vision tunneled, the edges going gray. Blood drained from his head, pooling in his legs and abdomen. The world went gray, then black. He was on the edge of unconsciousness, on the edge of blacking out completely, but he held the pull, fighting to stay awake, fighting to keep the stick back. He could feel the Dauntless responding, could feel the nose coming up, could feel the aircraft transitioning from a nearly vertical dive to something approaching level flight. The altimeter was climbing, 150 feet, 175, 200. Behind him, less than 2 seconds after he released, the bomb hit. Fletcher did not see the impact. He was too low, too focused on not crashing into the ocean, too busy fighting the controls of an aircraft that was damaged and barely responding. But Kozlowski saw it. Kozlowski, who had come back to consciousness just in time to watch the bomb fall, watched it punch through Kaga's flight deck exactly amidships, precisely between the forward and aft elevators, right where the briefing had said to him. Kozlowski watched the deck bulge upward like a bubble, watched a gout of flame and smoke erupt from the wound, watched secondary explosions ripple across the carrier as fueled aircraft and armed torpedoes cooked off in the hangar below. Kozlowski grabbed Fletcher's shoulder and shook him, yelling into the intercom. "You got her. Direct hit. She is burning." "Oh God, she is burning bad." Fletcher leveled off at 600 feet and looked back over his shoulder. Kaga was already listing to starboard, her flight deck, obscured by a column of black smoke that rose thousands of feet into the sky, a pillar of fire visible for miles. Flames were spreading forward and aft, consuming everything in their path. He could see crew members jumping into the water, tiny figures in dark uniforms choosing the ocean over the fire. He could see escort destroyers moving in to help, preparing to pick up survivors. He could see the other carriers in the formation, turning hard, maneuvering to avoid the same fate. He did not feel triumph. He did not feel relief. He felt numb, hollowed out, as if someone had reached into his chest and scooped out everything that made him human, leaving only an empty shell that still knew how to fly. His Dauntless was dying. He could hear the engine misfiring, cylinders cutting in and out, the rhythm uneven and failing. He could smell burning oil, thick and acrid. The control surfaces were sluggish, responding a half-second late to his inputs. Something essential had been damaged in the dive. Maybe a hydraulic line severed by shrapnel. Maybe a structural member cracked from the G-forces. He had maybe 10 minutes of flight time left before the engine quit completely, maybe less. The carrier was 70 miles away, maybe more depending on how far they had drifted during the attack. He was not going to make it. The math did not work. Kozlowski was on the radio, calling for help, giving their position, requesting immediate assistance. Fletcher tried to calculate the odds of being picked up if they ditched in the open ocean. Not good. The ocean was big. The rescue crews were stretched thin, busy pulling other pilots out of the water. If he went into the water, he would probably die of exposure or dehydration before anyone found him. He thought about his promise. Come home. Whatever happens, come home. He had broken it. He had traded his life for a burning carrier, and he could not decide if that was a fair trade or if he had just thrown everything away for nothing. His hands were shaking again, worse than before, tremors running up his arms and into his shoulders. He wanted to cry. He wanted to scream. He wanted to turn the aircraft around and ram it into another carrier, finish the job properly, go out in fire and fury instead of slow suffocation in a sinking aircraft. But he did not. He kept flying west, toward the spot where the carrier should be, knowing he probably would not reach it, hoping anyway because hope was all he had left. McCluskey's voice came over the radio, steady and calm. All units, form up on me. We are going home. Fletcher looked for McCluskey's aircraft and found it, 2 miles ahead and 500 feet higher. He pushed the throttle forward, coaxing the dying engine to give him a little more speed, a little more time. The Dauntless responded, barely, like a wounded animal making one last effort. He was losing altitude, 100 feet per minute, maybe more. The numbers did not add up. Simple arithmetic said he would hit the water before he reached the carrier. But he kept flying, kept nursing the throttle, kept watching the engine temperature gauge climb into the red zone. Kozlowski was praying again. Fletcher could hear him over the intercom, a soft continuous murmur in Polish and English mixed together. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Fletcher was not a religious man. His family had gone to church on Sundays, but it had always felt more like a social obligation than a spiritual experience. But he found himself praying to, not to any specific God, just to the universe in general, to whatever force controlled luck and fate and whether pilots lived or died. Please, please let me make it home. Please let this be enough. Please let the engine hold together for just a little longer. The flight back to the carrier took 43 minutes, the longest 43 minutes of Fletcher's life. His engine quit twice, coughing and sputtering before catching again, each time losing 100 feet of precious altitude. He nursed the throttle like a dying patient, babying the engine, trading what little altitude he had for forward distance, gliding when the engine quit, praying when it restarted. Other Dauntlesses from the squadron passed him, climbing higher, heading home faster. Some waggled their wings in salute, others just flew past, their pilots focused on their own survival. Fletcher did not blame them. By the time he spotted the carrier in the distance, he was down to 300 feet and still sinking, the engine running more on fumes and prayer than actual fuel. The deck crew saw him coming and immediately started waving him off, signaling with large paddles that he was too damaged to land, that he should ditch alongside the carrier and they would pick him up. Standard procedure for an aircraft that might crash on the deck and damage other planes or kill deck crew. Fletcher ignored them. He had promised his father he would come home. Ditching in the ocean was not coming home. Landing on the deck was coming home, even if it killed him in the process. He lined up on final approach with no flaps because the hydraulics were dead, no landing gear indicator because the electrical system was failing, and an engine that was producing more smoke than power. The Dauntless swallowed through the air like a drunk trying to walk a straight line. He was too low, too slow, and too damaged to have any business attempting a carrier landing. But he did it anyway, because the alternative was giving up, and he had not survived a suicide dive just to give up now. The landing was ugly, a barely controlled crash that hit the deck hard enough to crack the landing gear struts. His tailhook caught the arresting wire for a split second, then snapped off under the strain, sending him skidding down the deck in a shower of sparks and screeching metal. Deck crew members scattered, diving out of the way. Fletcher stood on the brakes with all his weight, felt them grab for a moment, felt the Dauntless shudder and slide. The aircraft came to a stop 10 feet from the edge of the deck, close enough that Fletcher could see the ocean beyond the bow. The engine died. Silence, sudden and absolute after hours of roaring engines and screaming dives and thundering guns. Fletcher sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands still gripping the stick, unable to move, unable to process that he was alive and on the deck and not at the bottom of the ocean. Then Kozlowski was climbing out of the back seat, legs shaky, face pale, slapping the side of the fuselage and yelling that they had made it, they were alive, they were home. Fletcher unbuckled his harness with fingers that would not quite work properly and tried to stand. His legs would not hold him. He collapsed onto the deck, and deck crew members caught him before he fell. The squadron lost 6 aircraft that day. 3 pilots and 3 gunners did not come home, their aircraft shot down or ditched in the ocean. Their bodies never recovered. Fletcher survived. Kozlowski survived. The Dauntless, despite taking over 40 holes from shrapnel and bullets, survived long enough to get them back, then was pushed over the side of the carrier the next morning because it was too damaged to repair. Kaga did not survive. She burned for 7 hours before her captain ordered the crew to abandon ship. A Japanese destroyer put 2 torpedoes into her hull to finish the job and prevent her from falling into American hands. She went down bow first with over 800 men still aboard, taking with her the aircraft and pilots and mechanics that might have struck the American carriers and changed the outcome of the battle. 3 other Japanese carriers were hit that day by other squadrons attacking in the same desperate fashion. Akagi, flagship of the carrier force, took a bomb that detonated in her hangar deck and set off a chain reaction that gutted her from the inside. Soryu took 3 bombs in quick succession and sank in 20 minutes. Hiryu survived the initial attack and launched a counterattack that damaged the American carrier Yorktown, but was found and bombed later that afternoon. By sunset on June 4, 1942, Japan had lost 4 fleet carriers, the core of her striking power, in a single afternoon. The Battle of Midway was over. The strategic initiative in the Pacific had shifted. Japan would spend the rest of the war on the defensive, never again able to mount an offensive operation on the scale of Midway or Pearl Harbor. And somewhere in the middle of that turning point was a kid from Kansas who had been told by his squadron mates, half joking and half serious, that he would not last 30 seconds against the Japanese defenses. But he had lasted long enough to make a difference. He had lasted long enough to put a 1,000-pound bomb exactly where it needed to go. He had lasted long enough to help change the course of history. Fletcher flew 37 more combat missions before the Navy pulled him off the line in November of 1943. By that point, he had accumulated for confirmed hits on enemy vessels, to probables, and a reputation among his squadron mates as the pilot who would press a dive farther than anyone thought sane or survivable. He never attempted another suicide dive, never pushed an attack below 500 feet again. He never needed to. The Japanese carrier fleet, the force that had seemed invincible in the spring of 1942, was broken. Japan would build more carriers, but never again with the quality and experience of pilots and crew that went down with Akagi, Kaga, Soryu and Hiryu. The new carriers were manned by inexperienced pilots rushing through abbreviated training programs, boys who had logged fewer hours than Fletcher had before Midway. The balance of power in the Pacific had shifted, and it would never shift back. After the war, Fletcher went home to Kansas in the spring of 1946. He married Linda 3 months later in a small ceremony at the Methodist church where his mother taught Sunday school. He took over his father's garage as planned and ran it for 37 years, expanding it to 4 bays and eventually passing it on to his son. He almost never talked about the war. His daughters grew up knowing their father had flown in the Navy, that he had been at Midway, but they did not know details. He deflected questions with vague answers and changes of subject. It was only after his death in November of 1994 that his family found a box in the attic containing his flight logs, his medals including a Navy Cross for the Kaga dive, and a stack of letters from men he had flown with. One of the letters was from Kozlovsky, written in the summer of 1968, 26 years after Midway. In it, Kozlovsky described the dive on Kaga in detail, the way Fletcher had pushed the attack past every safety limit, the way he had refused to pull up until the bomb was away, the way he had pulled out of the dive so low that Kozlovsky had been certain they were both dead men. At the end of the letter, Kozlovsky wrote that he had spent 26 years trying to understand why Fletcher had done it, why he had risked both their lives on a single bomb when he could have released higher and safer. The only conclusion Kozlovsky could reach was that some men, when pushed to the absolute edge, found something inside themselves they did not know existed. Something harder than fear, something stronger than self-preservation, something that allowed them to do the impossible because the alternative was unacceptable. Historians have studied the Battle of Midway for over 8 decades now, analyzing every decision, every tactic, every stroke of luck and skill that turned the engagement into an American victory. Most focus on the strategic level, the intelligence breakthrough that gave Admiral Nimitz forewarning of the Japanese plan, the decision to commit all 3 American carriers to the defense of Midway, the timing of the Japanese launch cycles that left their carriers vulnerable. Some focus on the operational level, the way the torpedo bomber squadrons sacrificed themselves to pull the Japanese fighters down to low altitude, leaving the sky clear for the dive bombers. But buried in the footnotes of a few naval history books, in the after-action reports and the debriefing transcripts, are references to the dive bomber pilots who pressed their attacks to what Japanese survivors later described as suicidal altitudes. One Japanese anti-aircraft officer, interviewed by American historians in the 1950s, said that his crew aboard Kaga had been trained to expect American pilots to release their bombs between 5,000 and 3,000 feet. Their firing solutions, their tracking systems, their doctrine, all assumed that American pilots would follow their training and release at a safe altitude. When the Dauntlesses kept diving below 2,000 feet, below 1,000 feet, below what any rational calculation said was survivable, his gunners panicked. They stopped trying to lead the targets mathematically and just fired blindly into the sky, hoping to hit something, praying to hit something. The American pilots, he said, fought like men who had already accepted death, who had made peace with dying and were now concerned only with taking as many of the enemy with them as possible. That acceptance, that willingness to trade their lives for a single accurate bomb hit, was something Japanese doctrine had not accounted for, something that broke the mathematical models and the tactical assumptions. Fletcher never considered himself a hero. He told his wife once, late in life after too much whiskey at a family reunion, that he had just been scared and desperate and too stubborn to quit. He said that the real heroes were the men who did not come back, the pilots whose aircraft went into the ocean and were never found, whose families received telegrams instead of homecomings. He said that he had survived mostly through luck, through the random chance of where shrapnel hit and where it missed, through the grace of an engine that held together just long enough. He said that the only thing he had done right was make a promise to his father and refuse to break it, even when breaking it would have been easier and safer. But the men who flew with him saw it differently. They saw a pilot who, when the moment came and everything was on the line, had the courage to dive straight into the fire and trust that he would come out the other side. They saw a man who lasted far longer than 30 seconds, who lasted long enough to change history. They saw a man who helped break the back of the Japanese carrier fleet, 1,000-pound bomb at a time, delivered with a precision born of desperation and determination. If you found this story powerful and want to keep these lesser-known World War II stories alive, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with anyone who appreciates the courage and sacrifice of those who fought in the Pacific, in Europe, in every theater of the war. Leave a comment letting us know where you are watching from, or if you have family members who served. Share your own stories, your own connections to this history. These stories matter. These men and women matter. And the best way to honor them is to remember, to tell their stories, to make sure that what they did and what they sacrificed is never forgotten.